everybody. My name's Kathleen Davis, and I am a spiritual director, and I do a lot of retreat leadership here in St. Louis, and I just recently became the director of the Spiritual Direction Program down at Aquinas, and I'll be teaching spiritual direction in the fall, so I'm very excited to be moving into that. So I think we called tonight Demystifying the Mystics. Mm-hmm. So let's just kind of figure out where our starting ground is. So if you hear the word mystic, what comes to mind? Julian of Norwich. Okay.
A fog.
A fog? Okay, yeah. Anything else? Meister Eckhart, yeah.
Far away from my everyday experience.
Far away from, oh, that's interesting, Sean, okay. So I'll tell you, when I first heard the word, I was doing my master's over at Aquinas. And I had this one professor, and someone said to me, they said, "No, she's a mystic, don't you?" And I thought, no, and I have no idea what you're talking about. Does that mean that she knows what I'm thinking before I say it? Does that mean she has some sort of special connection that the rest of us don't have? What does that mean? And actually I brought it up to some Protestant friends of mine who, when I was doing retreats on the mystics, I told them what I was doing, and they kind of looked at each other really funny, and I said, "Well, do you know what that means?" And she said, "Well, you're talking like witchcraft, right?" I thought, well, no. So anyway, I think it's first of all a term it's grounded in the word mystery, right? There's something mysterious about it, and we've labeled these people, right, as mystics that seem to be far away from our everyday life, but maybe not so much. And so as I was getting further and further into my studies, and I read constantly, I read spiritual literature all the time, more and more I would see these quotes that just sort of spoke right to my heart. And it would say, well, the mystic so-and-so said this. So for example, Julian of Norwich, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And my deepest me is God," Catherine of Genoa. "We are all words of God," Meister Eckhart. "We are divine sparks of the radiance of God's brilliance," Hildegard of Bingen. Do any of those names sound familiar? I know we heard a couple of them, but first of all, women in the crowd, Hildegard of Bingen. I want you to know who she is. Do you know what a doctor of the church is? Good Catholic students? So we have, 30-some male doctors of the church. So these are the people who we look to be leaders, teachers, because of what they've experienced and what they've taught us over the years. So we have 30-some male doctors of the church. We have 4 females. Anybody? No, you don't count. No, go ahead. Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, and Hildegard of Bingen. So right before Pope Benedict retired, it was one of the last things he did, was he made Hildegard a doctor of the church. And we're going to talk about her a little bit in the evening, but she's just this incredibly brilliant woman who lived in the 1100s and was way, way, way ahead of her time. So these are the people that we kind of put this word mystic around, and no wonder they feel like they're totally outside of our daily experience, right? But Karl Rahner, who's a German theologian, said that the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will cease to exist. Okay? So the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will cease to exist. pretty powerful words that probably call us all to stop and say, okay, wait a minute, what is this mystic thing then? And I think the signs of our times are really calling us to embrace this mysticism, whatever it might be. We're going to talk about it and to claim it. And I'm going to teach you before the night is over how to develop it. Okay? So what does it mean? What's the word mean? Well, if you go to the Dictionary of Theology, which is where I always go first, it will say that mysticism is, first of all, an experience of God. Okay? And secondly, that there's some kind of process that results from this experience of God. So the first part, right? So some experience of God, right? Some knowing of God, some moment of feeling touched by God, some clarity about God, that sense of fullness that sometimes we get, that we know God is a part of. I'm going to guess that each of us has had some experience of God. Right? And so secondly, then there's some process that happens because of that. Okay, so we don't just have this experience and then we shrug it off or we forget about it. It somehow changes us. It somehow takes us into some kind of transformation. Okay? So a mystic is a person who has had some experience of God, and some process, some transformation has occurred in their life because of that experience of God. Is this beginning to sound closer to your daily realm of existence?
You've got me interested.
Okay. All right. So the American Heritage Dictionary would say that mysticism is a belief in the existence of realities beyond perceptual or intellectual understanding that are central to being and directly accessible by subjective experience. So what this is saying, right, is that it's these realities that we don't understand. It is this mystery. But we have subjective ways of tapping into it, of experiencing it, of being a part of it. Evelyn Underhill wrote this little book in the 1950s called Practical Mysticism. And she said that mysticism is the art of union with reality. And reality is capitalized, and that's her word for the divine or God. She said the mystic is a person who has attained that union in greater or less degree, or who aims at and believes in such attainment. So maybe even if we haven't experienced God and had some transformation because of that, the desire for that is enough to put us in the realm of being a mystic. The desire to be one with God, the desire to know God, to be loved by God, to love God. That's what a mystic is. Richard Rohr, he wrote a book called The Naked Now, which is a lot about mysticism. And he said a mystic is one who is moved from mere belief systems and belonging systems into an actual experience of God. So that God kind of comes out of God's not just found in the building behind the rules, right? You've experienced God. There's been some experience. And he goes on to say, God is always with us, inviting us to take notice, to contemplate God's presence perpetually. We are too frightened, lazy, suspicious, arrogant, to still our own thoughts and let divine sensation have its way. Mystics rely on sensation over thought. They are receptive to God in the ordinary. pressing ever deeper and wider to experience unity with God in all that surrounds us. So if we kind of look back a little bit, in a lot of our history, a lot of what we've been taught, a lot of our theology, we were taught that God was up, right? God was up in heaven. Are you guys still taught that, or are we learning new ways today? Tell me that you're learning new ways today. So that God was up here, right? And our goal was not to be here, it was to be there, right? That we had to follow the rules and do what we were supposed to do and check all the boxes so that we could get up there. But throughout the centuries, if you begin to study the mystics, and these are voices that started with Paul. Paul was one of our first mystics, right? They have reminded us over and over and over again throughout the centuries that God is not up there. God is right here, right now, with us, within us, around us, constantly. We have these beautiful voices that have told us that over and over and over again, and continue to tell us that. So mysticism is really, it's about going down. It's about going deeper, about experiencing life in a deeper way. It's about touching into the depths of ourselves, beginning to really listen to who we are. It's about going into the depths of our communities and societies and seeing what's really happening there. It's about realizing that God is in the fullness and the beauty and the joy of life, and God is in the darkness and the suffering and the really hard things of life. The coolest thing is that these mystics come from all different religious traditions. So we have our Christian mystics who we hear a lot about here. But there are mystics within, so Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam. So, so some Sufi poets, masters you might have heard of are Rumi. Has anybody heard of Rumi? Hafiz? Okay. So Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam. Kabbalah is the mystical branch of Judaism. And we even hear it in the Hindu and the Buddhists. It's these what the mystics have done, and what they've done over time, is they've kind of repeated the same messages over and over and over again. And if we look into the very depths of what we believe, we find similarities, we find truths. And I think this is what's so fascinating about studying the mystics, is they point us right to the truth. So looking at Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, there's these themes. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to talk to you about the themes that emerge within the mystical teachings. Unless somebody has a question before we go on. You with me so far? Okay. So the one thing we discover right away is that all of us believe that there is this greater divine source, this being, of course, who we call God, right? This higher power that is constantly drawing us into relationship. It is not separate from us at all. Constantly drawing us in. And the ultimate goal is to be drawn in, is to let ourselves be drawn in. So the Sufis have this beautiful image. They talk about the divine kiss. So they say that before we're born, God kisses us and then sends us into the world. And so as babies, we're joyful, we're carefree, we remember this kiss, right? As little kids, we remember this kiss. But as we get older and life gets a little more complicated, things start getting we forget, right? We forget. And so for Sufis, the mystical journey is when we remember the divine kiss, when we remember who we are, and we begin this journey home to our divine source. The other message that we'll hear is that we are one. We are completely connected. We are completely dependent on each other. We are interconnected. Our source is the same, and therefore we are one. In John 17, Jesus' sort of final prayer, right, is he asks God to let us know that we are one. As he and God are one, so we all are one, right? Thomas Merton, you guys know Thomas Merton? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Thomas Merton, Trappist monk, would have been 100 years old last year, I guess. So Thomas Merton said, "We are already one, but we imagine that we are not. And what we have to recover is our original unity. What we have to be is what we are." So if you pay attention these days to science, to cosmology, to theology, this theme, even to sociology, right? This theme of oneness is coming at us in big ways, right? And it's so important that we remember it. So it says to us, right, that as humans, as a human family, first of all, right, we are totally interconnected because part of us is God. That we share in that divine essence of God. And so when I see you, I see God. When I see you, I see God, right? And so we've got to start looking at each other that way rather than, well, you look a little different than me, or you believe something different than I do, and so we are not one. And we are going to be divided. How many of you think our world is a little too divided these days? How many of you think our country is a little too divided these days? Yeah, this call to oneness is essential. And it's fascinating. Science is saying the same thing, that we're basically composed of the same, right, the same building blocks. That we are one. The other piece of that, then, though, too, is what Pope Francis wrote about last year, right? We are also part of and one with all of creation. All of creation. So St. Francis of Assisi was a mystic who lived this idea of oneness with all of creation in a radical, radical way, right? Not only did he put himself amongst sort of the least of creatures, right? That's what we always think of with St. Francis, is that he talked to animals and that he wouldn't step on worms and that he preached to birds and did all this stuff. But he also placed himself in the depths of humanity, right? He was one with the leper. He was one with the poorest of poor. He was one with the homeless. And he was also one of the first to, he went and approached the imam of the Muslims, right? He didn't want this fighting. He wanted to find some common ground. And so he went even to the places where the differences were so severe, right? To say that, no, we are connected. We are brother and sister. Right? His famous canticle to the sun is all about brother sun, sister moon, you know, there's just this in-depth relationship with all of creation. And again, what are we hearing these days about our planet, right? That if we don't start recognizing that and taking care of our natural resources, our fellow creatures, right, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So Hildegard, so she grew up in Germany, right? She lived in the German Rhineland, so this beautiful, green, abundant land. And she knew all about plants. She actually knew how to use plants for medicine. So back in the 1100s, did I say that? Okay. So she came up with this word to describe God, to describe the essence of God. And it's Veriditas, which we would maybe translate into greening. That God's this green energy life force that we see all around us, right? That God is, that all of creation is juicy, was a word she would use, with the life force of God. And so she actually used this expression, living greenly, right? Back in the 1100s. And would warn people back then. She has quotes about, we've been given nature so that we can care for it and it can care for us. If we don't care for nature, we're the ones that are going to suffer. And so, 800 years ago, she was letting us know what can happen if we lose that connection with who we are as fellow creatures, right? As oneness with all of creation. So we've got this divine source, okay? We are all connected. We are all one. Another really common piece to mystical teachings is silence. That silence in prayer is essential. How many of you have any kind of silent prayer practice? Meditation? Yeah. They would say it's vital. And I would say it's probably more vital today than it's ever been, right? We have a world that never turns off, right? He's looking at his cell phone, I'm sorry. But we're constantly, right? We're constantly being distracted by something, right? And so we've got to take time to be silent, to be still, to learn to listen deep within ourselves, to learn to listen for the voice of God. Teresa of Avila was a huge proponent of this. So Teresa started out in a monastery where she was kind of like a party girl. She was the center of attention. Everybody loved her. There was constant communication. There was constant activity. It was just this busy, bustling place. And she realized, this is no place to draw closer to God. This is no place that I can really pray. And that's why she went and she started, she reformed the order of the Carmelites, right, so that they could have this silent prayer. And that's their charism up until today, right, that they pray silently, they live silently, cloistered. So this quiet prayer is really essential. Because what happens in our silent prayer is another element of what the mystics all talk about, is we discover our true selves. And that true self is God within us. So Thomas Merton will talk a lot about our true selves and our false selves. And he says that our false selves, God doesn't even know who that is because it's not who God created, right? So we all have to put on masks. We're all raised in families and situations that kind of push us to be somebody we might not want to be every now and then, right? Or we have to follow along with the crowd for some reason or another, right? And so we begin to develop these false selves. It's not really who we are. And as we spend more time in contemplation and silence, we begin to discover again who that true self is. And Thomas Merton would say that when I discover my true self, I will discover God. And when I discover God, I will discover my true self. Heavy, right? So just who's our true self? Like, what does that mean, right? Well, it's the person we are that feels most right. So, for instance, if you're doing something that brings you a lot of joy, if you're doing something that you feel a lot of energy around, right? If you're doing something that you feel really excited about, you're operating out of your true self. You're tapping into your God-given gifts and working out of those. When you don't have energy around things, when you get bored and frustrated, those are indications that there's something there that's not really you. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so a big part of the spiritual journey is letting go of all that stuff. Teresa of Avila would say it's when God prunes our branches so that the real fruit can grow. It's the dead stuff. It's the stuff that gets in the way. It gets in the way of our relationship with God. It gets in the way of us truly sort of becoming who we are, who we want to be. And so the sooner we can recognize those things and let go of them, begin to let go of them, the sooner we're going to grow into who God has really created us to be. And that's kind of a lot. Are you following me? Usually I do this talk in like either, 3 hours or 3 days. So this is the condensed version of mysticism, okay? But it's very real. And I think the heart of it is what's so hard to believe, right? Is that part of me is God. Or that Catherine of Genoa, the deepest part of me is God. And so for the mystics, it's all about surrendering to that and allowing that part of ourselves to be what comes, what unfolds. Questions? Thoughts? Yes, Mark.
Like the things that you're describing, I feel like I can do like from time to time for very brief periods of time.
Yeah.
How do you live out of that space with greater regularity? Like, is that even feasible? Like, I'm thinking of like, the ancient Jews used to talk about like, no one can see the face of God.
Yeah.
So like, how can you realistically like live out of this awareness of our oneness in more than just like fleeting moments in a day or 1 or 2 days?
Well, and it might only be fleeting moments, right? But at least you're having moments. Whereas a lot of people walk around completely unconscious to what they're experiencing. So I think anybody I work with in spiritual direction, I really, really encourage this silent prayer. The more time we spend listening deeply for God's voice, which may or may not come, the longer we spend in silence listening to our own heart, to our own thoughts, right? We gain clarity. And what happens is from that stillness, right, we move into the world a little bit more still. From that awareness, we move into the world a little bit more aware. At the end of this, I have this 10-step process to mysticism so that you all can do exactly what Mark's talking about. But I think it's a lifelong journey, right? I think even like our Teresa of Avila's and our Julian of Norwich's, that up until the end, they were struggling with living into this on a constant basis. But they'd experienced it, and they knew it was the truth, and they let it take them. They went with it. Any other questions before we move on? Sean. Yes.
So, on one hand, you're talking about like that paying attention to God. We notice where there's life and energy and
that's paying attention to yourself, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yes. And you compared that or contrasted that rather with the idea of like frustrations or whatnot.
Mhm.
This is the main thing that stuck with me. What does that look like in, say, like Teresa of Avila's life, whenever the frustration of like when she was trying to reform the Carmelites, the rest of the order wasn't behind her,
Right.
and it was painful, and it was not life-giving, and it was not,
Right.
you know,
Right.
just full of energy.
Right. So, do we all know Teresa's counterpart, John of the Cross? So that's part of it. That's part of the journey, is the struggle and the suffering and the darkness. John would discover God in the deepest darkness. So John of the Cross, so Teresa of Avila, and I try to avoid John of the Cross because he's super difficult. But basically what he's telling us is like what I said in the beginning. God is part of the suffering too. That there's something in that suffering then, in that darkness, in that frustration that says, okay, I need to let that go. I need to surrender to it. I need to allow it to do whatever it's going to do to me so that I can be, so that I can learn from it, I can grow from it, and not be trampled down by it, not be victimized by it, not be hindered by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that life, right? Everybody suffers. I think that was the big message of the cross, right? Jesus didn't come and have this like incredibly blissful, joyful, enlightened life. He was in the depths of horrible human suffering. And so he's in the depths of our human horrible suffering. Not that he's creating it, I don't believe that, but there's something within that we can grow from, that we can change from, that we can be somehow transformed by. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, like you guys, like you get fed up with a group of friends, or you get bored, or you are like idle gossip, or there's just something that you're around it, and you feel something deep inside you, right, that just says, I don't need to be a part of this anymore. I don't want to do this. Is that? I mean, that's what happens to me. I don't know. Anyway, and so I pay attention to that, right, and I figure out how to let that go and how to move away from it in a peaceful way, not in a, I'm done with you guys, but just knowing that I don't need that. I don't need it. I don't need to feel that. I don't need to let it consume me. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So it's those places that give me joy, that I feel energy around, that excitement, gratitude. Those are the places I want to go to. Other questions? Thoughts? Yes.
Besides silent prayer, how else could you practice it?
How else can you practice what? Okay.
Mysticism. It makes not perfect sense, because that's just silly.
Well, I'm gonna email Sean my tree of contemplative practices tomorrow. So there are ways to practice it, but there are ways of being contemplative without sitting still and being silent too, right? How many of you do yoga? So yoga is this body, mind, spirit connection, right? A lot of people, through the breathing, through the moving of the body, have time to process thoughts while they're doing it, right? Things like walking meditations, right? Labyrinths, that kind of thing. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's writing. There's all kinds of ways to begin to practice being contemplative, which is that looking deeper within. So it can be sitting, it can be silent, but it also can involve movement, or maybe it's music that touches something within you, right? You guys are all pushing me to the end of the talk here with this practice thing. Let me go on, okay? And we will get back to that. But yeah, there are ways to practice it. There are. Any other questions about mysticism? Does it feel less mystical yet? Less? Okay.
So you feel like the more you study these mystics, you feel like everybody is capable of this. Are we all called to be mystics? Do you feel like?
The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will cease to exist.
I'm curious. A lot of what you're saying about like just the awareness of like your just joys and frustrations sounds very Ignatius to me.
Yeah.
How does Saint Ignatius fit into mysticism?
Well, Ignatius would be
Yeah.
a mystic,
Okay.
right? And I think he, like the consolation desolation, right? That's an interior. Those are interior movements, right? That's paying attention to those feelings. So yeah, I would say that his way is definitely a mystical way.
You mentioned a couple times that quote that Christian of the future will be a mystic or cease to exist. Do you see the spirituality of more and more Catholics changing, morphing into what we're describing tonight?
I think the spirit is on the move. I think there is something happening that people are searching, people that I encounter are searching for something deeper, more authentic, more real. So, yes, save me. Go ahead.
I have like a comment on the silent part.
Yeah.
It's like one of the big benefits of any religion is having a community.
Yeah.
And you can't really have a community without interacting. Given you can interact through actions, not verbally. But how does one balance being both a community and also being silent to discover your true self?
Well, I love the way on Sundays, let's take 3 deep breaths and just be silent before we start, right? You have community prayer, right? But there should be some time too for individual prayer, right? But community is essential. But your time alone with God is pretty important too. And so, so there's a space that you can create silence in. I have nothing against earbuds and music and handheld devices and stuff, but just an intentional setting that aside for 10 minutes while you walk to class and just notice things around you instead of being plugged into something else, right? But yeah, yes, community is very important. I agree with you. But there should be some time for just you and God to be with each other as well. So, yes, good questions. I danced right over that one, Mark, didn't I? I hope that this is becoming more a part of who we are, right? I think like the message of oneness is so important that we pay attention to that and embrace it and live by it. I think the message of you are original goodness. We talk a lot about original sin, but if we look at Genesis, right, we were made in the image and likeness of God. And then to animate us, to bring us to life, God's own breath went into us. And that's where God's breath still is. Like we really are, as Paul says, temples of God. And it's not just some of us that got something figured out, it's all of us. Regardless of what we look like, what we believe, where we come from, it's all of us. So I think the messages are so important. Do I hear them a lot? Not necessarily. But I think they're important. So scripture, another one. That was my next piece. Was we're told this in scripture over and over that God is within us. In the second letter, Peter's second letter, he says, God's divine power has given us everything needed for life and godliness through knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Thus God has given us through these things his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become participants of the divine nature. So there's this word in theology that the Eastern Church has really held on to, and the Western Church doesn't hold on to so much anymore, and that's theosis. And that's us being part of the divine essence of God. God within. So it's learning how to somehow believe that and embrace it. Let's do this first. So I'm going to give you this handout. And just look at the top side for now, because the second side is the one that you're all looking for. Let's just look at these quotes for a minute.
Don't be shy. Totally feel free to refill on snacks.
Yeah. Get up and move around for a minute if you need to. We've been sitting still for 50 whole minutes. So just take a minute and kind of read through those. Let those sink into you a little bit. So are any of that, are there, which ones of those resonate with you? Which ones challenge you?
The last one.
Resonates or challenges?
The challenges, the ones that you have to find. I'm really good at giving a love. It's the barriers in which I create that I don't open myself up for.
Yep.
I'm terrible at.
Yeah, so that's this sort of true self, false self, right? What is it that keeps you from being that loving person that God's created you to be? Those are the things you have to start identifying.
I also really liked this image of the feather,
Yes.
being a feather on the breath of God.
Yes. What other ones do you like?
If you are what you are meant to be, you will set the world on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Caverna Siena. So do you get a sense of, so I guess what touches me so deeply about some of these quotes, and there's just so many more of them, right, is that any rules or anything I've put around God, any sort of boundaries I've put around God or images are just totally blown away, right? That God is just this just incredible love, right? That delights in us, that's completed by us, that is seeking us. Wow.
I'm inspired that through the ages, all of these men and women are sort of hitting at the same thing. I mean, not only do they live at all different times, we have mystics among us that
Yes.
they're tapping into this. It makes it so much more real to me.
Yes.
That we're able to tap into this as humans. That
Yes.
These were real thinkers,
Yeah.
theologians that
Yes. Yeah.
all hitting on the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of Julian of Norwich's like big discoveries, right? And she was another person that we talked about discovering that we can't discover God until we discover our true selves. And what she discovered was that, right, that God was pure love. You know, she grew up in a time when the church would teach that, well, no, God was vengeful, and God was judging God, and you had to do the right things in order for God to love you. And what she discovered was, no, God is total mercy, total love. And so what occurred to her was that if that's who God is, and that's who God created me to be, then that's who I am. That's that true self we're talking about, right? The goodness, the pure goodness of God within each one of us. Mark?
A question for you.
Yes.
So many of these quotes, as well as other you've mentioned, are so poetic
Yes.
and so not literal. How do we, as as descendants of culture of enlightenment, where we champion reason, we value the scientific method, and we are of the WashU community. We're extremely intelligent.
Yes.
How do we not let all those things become barriers when it seems like the literal and the factual is of lesser consequence to these brilliant mystics?
So, I think like Thomas Aquinas, right? He wrote this huge systematic theology book, right? And then at the end discovered that it was kind of, but he's got even these really poetic quotes about God, right? And, God gave us brains and intellects for very good reasons. But if we can't get it out of here and move it down to here, we're stuck. And so I think that's where it happens, right? I think that this informs what's happening and what we can know and what we can judge and what we can sort of figure out as truth in our own way. But if it doesn't resonate here, it doesn't work. Does that make sense? That this is all good, but it's got to move here. Yes.
What about those who don't have the ability to make that connection? Like, I feel like children can't, make that great connection with being able to understand their true selves and see God, or those who are in a place where they can't silence themselves, they can't silence their lives, and make that time for God. What about those? Because we are all pretty able to,
Right.
thinkers, and
Yeah.
what about those?
Well, I don't think kids need to. I mean, I think kids get to be kids, right? Like that's when Jesus keeps telling us that that's how we're supposed to be, right? Is to live that way. Yeah, as far as people that don't have the ability, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. If they have the desire,
Are we supposed to not make up for that, but it's, I don't know. There's a way we
well, I think you are you, and you get to do. But if there's someone that you can help in that way, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, but I don't really have one. God loves whoever that person is, whatever his abilities are, right where that person is. God knows that that person is capable of only so much, or more maybe than we could ever know. So I think God meets people right where they are. But I think our other call is to, of course, right, be Christ, and however that might look. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to change their prayer life, but if you can just help them to little light in their darkness. Other questions or quotes that you like, that you want to hold on? Does anybody want to put one of these on their mirror, their bathroom mirror? How about Thomas Burton's quote about being a saint? What do you think about that one? I read that and I was like, oh man, talk about freedom, right? Be a saint means to be myself.
I really like Thomas Aquinas' way.
Yeah.
True delight in something so simplistic.
There's this guy that writes this enormous, the Summa, this huge theology book, right? That's just heady. And then he comes up with stuff like that.
I think it'd be just something really nice to be reminded about every morning.
God.
Something especially that you're dreading the next day.
Yeah. God delights in
Wake up that day.
Yeah. Somebody gave me a card one time, and there was a poem or a quote in it or something, but that when God sees you wake up in the morning, God says, "Yes, she's awake." I thought, wow, how cool was that?
I'm sure I could Google it, but do you have any good resources for like 500 badass quotes by mystics?
Oh.
Yeah, Google that.
Well, Goodreads. Yeah. You know what I do is I would Google quotes by certain ones. I've got I did this mystics retreat. It was a 5-night retreat, and every night, so there were 30 of us. Every night, somebody took a quote from a mystic, and that was their. Anyway, so I have a document that's got like 250 quotes on it, but it's I discovered it was like I fell in love with one, and then I'd move on to the next and the next and the next. I couldn't get enough of them. So even just to take some of these names and to go look for more quotes or books or something that they've written, and just go a little further with one of these mystics would be a great next step. Yes, Harriet.
I really like the Rumi quote.
Rumi. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know if everyone knows this. I learned it in a class I took at YU. Rumi is the largest selling poet in the world.
Yeah.
And your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Right. In my lifetime, and granted I've lived a long time, I've seen a lot of barriers go up.
Yeah. Yeah.
For many barriers of individuality has been so emphasized that in a way it takes away from community.
Yes. well, individuality as it takes away from community, but it also takes away from the fact that I'm connected to you, and whatever I do has some impact
Right.
on you, right? That every action we have has a reaction somewhere else. Yeah. Okay. How we doing? Good? All right, so should we move into this process piece? All right. So this was a great article, and what her premise was if she was talking to Hildegard, how would Hildegard teach us to be mystics? And so I've sort of summarized it. So she begins with notice, the word notice. Notice the world around you. Pay attention to all the details that you would normally take for granted. Colors, smells. If you close your eyes and just listen to all the different sounds you can hear, just begin to notice the world around you. I have this girl who's a little older than you all who comes to me for spiritual direction, and her car broke down. And she said, so I've been taking the bus to work. She said, I noticed so much more about my neighborhood and the people that I'm passing by. The park. I didn't even know I drove by a park every day. There's this beautiful park. Right? It's just kind of stopping and beginning to notice what's going on around us. And then we move from there into heightening our awareness. And so when we talk about awareness here, what I'm talking about is as you're noticing these things, how's your body responding? How's it feeling in your body? When I see that light green against the blue, I'm noticing that it makes me feel peaceful, right? So we begin to notice how our bodies respond and react to all that's going on around us. Our bodies are such incredible things. They are our conduits to God and to all of reality. Be good to your bodies. Be attentive. So in this is being totally present to who you're with, eye contact, sort of trying to silence everything else around you and just be attentive to that one thing, to let all of your attention go into one place, one person, one moment, whatever it is. Anthony DeMello would say that, and so again, to really engage your senses, hyper engage your senses. Anthony DeMello says, slow down, taste and smell and hear and let your senses come alive. If you want a royal road to mysticism, sit down quietly and listen to all the sounds around you. Oh, you'll see the miracle of what happens when your senses come unclogged, right? So there is this, we move so fast. We're so used to what we're seeing and who we're being around, and this is slowing down and really being present. And so once we start to do all these things, we begin to appreciate. It naturally happens. We begin to appreciate what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, who we're with. We begin to live out of gratitude. Right? It's a natural next step to all this focusing and attentiveness and presence. Practicing gratitude, right? We examine, we talked about Ignatius, right? Just even at the end of your day to just list the things that you're grateful for. Gratitude, gratitude. If the only prayer we ever say is thank you, it is enough. Meister Eckhart. Right? Gratitude. And so as we appreciate, right, we begin to realize how connected we are to all of this, to each other. we begin to honor those things that feed us, that nurture us. We give priorities to things that we feel connected to. Our relationships deepen. And it's in this phase 2 and the next that we realize what we're not connected to, what we don't need to hold on to. Right? So living authentically is when we discover these deep connections. We let go of illusions and expectations that drive us from the sacred. We live authentically out of our true self, right? We discover who we are and what brings us fullness, what really makes us feel alive. And then we begin to get rid of that stuff that doesn't. The pruning of the branches, let it go. 7, joy. We choose joy. We're joyful. It's a fruit of the Spirit working within us. It's a result of our feeling connected, of feeling grateful, of living authentically, of becoming who we really want to be and not letting those other things get in our way. Joy comes from that. Create. So Hildegard would say that God is this bubbling force within us that's just urging us to express God in some way. So whether that's through dancing or drawing or singing or gardening or whatever it is, writing, whatever it is that you do well, do it. Right? Create. Use your gifts and share them with the world. And 9, be still. There's that stillness and silence command that we kind of hear from the mystics. Listen to life. Learn to be still. Listen for the voice of God. Give yourself the gift of just simply being quiet and being with God. And all of this leads to love, right? And love's that power that's going to transform us, and that's going to send us into the world doing whatever it is we're called to do. We love ourselves, we love others, we recognize the divine within us, within divine here, all around us. Love. We live out of that love. And in that, too, I would say that she doesn't say it this way, but I think the mystical journey always takes us into action, right? If we're really paying attention to what makes us fully alive, right, and what breaks our heart, it's going to impel us to do something, to move, to do something to make the world a better place, or to bring God into the world, whatever it is. Mysticism is not about sitting quietly in our prayer chair and staying there. It's about moving then into the world and sharing our gifts, being who God wants us to be. Doesn't that sound easy? But really, so there is ways to practice this. And it starts with attentiveness and presence. What do you think? Questions? Challenges? Yes.
Could you give me a modern day example of a mystic?
Oh gosh.
I would qualify you as a mystic, but besides yourself.
Oh, I think they're all around you. They're all around us. Again, if we go back to that original definition, right? Someone who's experienced God and allowed their lives to be transformed through that experience, right? They're all around us. You have religious sisters that are part of this community, and I don't want to just make this a clergy thing because it's not. There's people all around you that are mystics. Do you have any favorite spiritual writers? Do you have any favorite?
I'm very partial to C.S. Lewis.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, he's a mystic, yeah. anybody else answer her question? Who else? Do you feel like are voices today that are really embracing and embodying what we're talking about?
I would say a lot of young men just entering the seminary that does pretty well.
Well, they're right here, people. What brought you here tonight? You're seeking that which seeks you. And that is enough. You call yourself a mystic, right? The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will cease to exist. This is why I think it's so important to talk about this. We put these people up on this huge pedestal, and many of them are just great leaders and great teachers, but so are you. So are you. Just gotta learn to embrace that. And allow God to be the one that lets you unfold. Trust that. The crowd's gone silent. Yes.
How much do you think that people shortchange their experiences? And and like for example, maybe are so totally reluctant to consider themselves a mystic, or have a heart, might experience something amazing, something brilliant, something so loving and wonderful, but don't identify it as God. Do we miss out on something when we don't make that connection, that additional step of saying, like, yeah, this is God in this moment? We don't see that as such?
I think so. I mean, I think that's for me, right? Every time I feel that, I think, okay, I'm on the right path. God's right here with me. I'm going right where I'm supposed to be going. Yeah, and I think that's the call to the presence and the attentiveness, right? If we can really pay attention and begin to name those moments when our heart feels so full we're going to explode, right? Or those moments our heart is so crushed. Right? Again, that piece of paying attention to our body and what it's telling us. It's so important. But yeah, Mark, I think, if we believe that God is pervasive, right? All around, always moving. The mystics have taught me that God is not static. God is always moving. That there's this flow we participate in when we begin to notice, and we begin to transform, and we begin to let God take us where God is taking us.
I think whenever I try to talk about this stuff with certain people, I get the vibe that they think that I'm like super new agey. Like, how do you navigate that? Like, trying to like incorporate people who are super concerned about like always remaining very orthodox and not like trying to like terrified of being new agey, I suppose.
New agey.
Leave the crystals at home.
Exactly.
In Maplewood is called Mystic Valley, and super funky crystals and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Well, so there's that, but
So that's, yeah.
I'm gonna go buy some crystals now.
I think this is such a hard time in life to be able to speak your truths in a lot of places, right? That I've gotten this freedom as I've grown older, and I don't care so much if I sound new agey in front of anybody, because I'm discovering, I'm listening, I'm discovering what feels like my truth, and I'm not going to let anybody take it from me now that I know it. But I know this is a hard time to do that. I remember. Yes.
I think one of the things that's really interesting is my senior year I took a capstone in positive psychology, and that's what my final senior project was about. And I took a class on mysticism at the same time. And it was always really funny to me to see how they're like pretty much mirror images of each other. And I always think that's so intriguing. Like it's the same thing but with like an extra word. And I think it's so fulfilling.
You know, it's again, so that science, the intellect and heart, but wouldn't God want what's best for our mind, body, soul, right? Like it, right? It's what feeds our minds, it's what feeds our souls. What else? What do you want to take away from here? Is anybody leaving here completely confused? Lost? No?
So only 2 of these 10 things actually say God.
Yeah.
These, you know, what Brennan's saying about the psychology, like all these things about being attentive and appreciative, like there's all the psychology data that backs up that people who are happier when they are have show gratitude and feel connected to people and have community and are like these are things that are those things you can talk about to people without making them feel so new agey because there's actually evidence for it. But the truth is what's happening is not necessarily just that I decided to by being in part of this community I'm now happy. It's also by being part of this community I am closer to God. So that's where my happiness comes from. So it's these things really are not. These are more universal truths more than they are just like someone who's only seeking God.
Well, and that's what the mystics point us to, are the universal truths. That, and not in a psychological way, but again, this is what brings us fullness. This is what brings us wholeness, joy, gratitude, and those are things of God.
Truth with a capital T. Perhaps.
Yes, yes, yes. Anything else?
They're all practicing their silence. They've gone straight into the prayer practice.
I feel, you know, so really, unless you came here tonight for the free beer, my gut is that you are seeking, right? You've come here to continue to learn about God, to continue to transform your life into God. And that, as Evelyn Underwood would say, is enough to call yourself a mystic. To be on the mystical path. So, keep going. The world needs you. Desperately. Amen?
Amen.
Okay.
That was terrific. Thank you so much.
How much do you cost just like walk behind me and talk to me all day? Yes. Yeah. I don't know if any of us asked beforehand.